I mean, there is already global retaliation against the invasion, and that includes a lot of things, right? The US and the European Union, as well as Japan and Taiwan, have imposed sanctions on Russia, both in kicking them out of financial markets. The way Russia currently works is that their banking system is basically under the control of Putin and his associated billionaire friends. They call them oligarchs, but they're just insanely rich Russians. And those banks are then what are used to fund things like the invasion or other economic activity in Russia. So there have been some wide-ranging sanctions against those organizations, and some of them against the individuals themselves. And one of the things that you're seeing sort of discussed in public discourse and then in diplomatic discourse is how much further to take those sanctions. Whether or not, for example, the real estate owned by Russian oligarchs in the UK or Canada is going to be seized by those governments. There's also talk about kicking Russian financial institutions out of the, it's called SWIFT, which is a secure money transfer system across the world. Those are all things that are currently being negotiated and debated as the conflict unfolds.
Speaking about the sanctions, I heard recently that in preparation for this, it's, Russia has been preparing for this for a while, and they built up their economic independence so that they wouldn't necessarily, knowing that once they went to war, that there would be sanctions against them. They kind of buffered themselves against that. So it'll be interesting to find out how impactful the sanctions actually are. They may actually be irrelevant,
yes,
hurting them financially if they've buffered themselves against those sanctions.
Yes, so that is something that is incredibly important to consider, and something that I've seen as well, because Putin himself and the oligarchs who run Russia have spent a lot of time since 2014 isolating themselves from further sanctions. The average citizen in Russia, of course, does not benefit very much from that. This is also a problem with economic sanctions in general, in that even if they're targeted, right, the leaders of a country like Russia are already super rich. So being rich means when you get sanctioned, you have more to sort of fall back on before you get hurt by those sanctions. And then any of the extra impacts that happen, right, to the Russian economy, right? For example, the ruble has tanked in value since in the last few days, right? The people who are affected by that first are always the ones that have the fewest resources. So it is important to remember that our retaliation is not without negative side effects as well. And that, right, Russia, anticipating that this was something that was going to continue to happen, has taken steps to try to mitigate that. We will see in the next few weeks to months how much of an effect that has. For example, one of the things that makes me think it might have an effect is that Taiwan today imposed sanctions on semiconductors that they normally trade with Russia for. Those semiconductors are used in computer chips and equipment that is used to build the Russian military. So while there might be stockpiles of those things, those still only last for so long. And the push of the sanctions is to try to make those hit earlier rather than later. But it is also a sort of we'll see kind of thing. So yeah, unfortunately, right, while we are retaliating in the ways that we can without causing nuclear war, which is the always the big risk, it is unclear how much of an impact those sanctions will actually have. That uncertainty we have to kind of always keep in mind, while also remembering that the Russians themselves who live in Russia are the ones who are going to be hurt first. Putin himself is the richest man in Russia. By some estimates, he might be the richest person in the world, given the amount of money and resources he can control. And so even if he is sanctioned heavily just as a person, there's still a lot of resources he can use to not be affected by that. And unfortunately, barring more intense intervention, that's kind of where we're stuck right now.